Hey, 8th graders, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're about to explore something truly remarkable. We're looking at the incredible, deeply interconnected design of life on Earth. I mean, have you ever actually stopped to think about where you get the energy to run, or to think, or even just to sit there and breathe? Well, today we are mapping out the sacred balance of energy and life. We're going to trace exactly how power moves from the sun, flows right through nature, and ultimately sustains every single one of us.
But before we dive headfirst into the science of it all, I want to ground our lesson in a really powerful truth. Matthew 4:4 says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And honestly, this perfectly sets up our dual focus for today. Just like our physical bodies are entirely dependent on the physical energy we get from food, our bread, our spirits are completely dependent on the spiritual energy and truth that comes from God's Word. Both of these systems require a continuous flow of nourishment if we want to survive and thrive.
So here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're starting with the chain of life, then we'll look at the math of energy transfer, how we go from chains to webs, God's sacred balance, and finally, how education is intertwined with morality. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The chain of life. Let's look at the absolute basics of energy flow.
So what exactly is a food chain anyway? Basically, a food chain is just a system showing how energy physically passes from one living thing to another. It always starts with a producer, like a plant that captures its energy directly from the sun. Then, that energy moves up to the consumers. First, you've got your primary consumers, which are your herbivores. Then come the secondary consumers, the carnivores. Every single living creature on this planet relies on this continuous relay race of energy.
Let's picture a classic 5-step example just to see this in action. Step 1 is the grass, our producer making food right out of sunlight. Step 2 is the grasshopper, the primary consumer that eats the grass. Step 3 is the frog, the secondary consumer who catches the grasshopper. Step 4 is the snake who eats the frog. And finally, step 5 is the hawk, our top predator soaring way up above who swoops down and eats the snake. It's actually a pretty amazing journey to think about. Just imagine it. A single, microscopic packet of solar energy enters a humble blade of grass on a sunny Tuesday afternoon and then physically travels from organism to organism, surviving this treacherous journey all the way up into the sky. It's a highly organized, perfectly executed delivery system.
Moving on to part 2, the math of energy transfer. Nature actually has some very strict rules here.
Okay, I want you to be active participants here, so I've got a question for you. Take a mental guess right now. What percent of energy do you think actually makes the jump from the grass to the grasshopper? Or from the grasshopper to the frog? If a grasshopper eats a leaf, how much of that leaf's stored energy actually gets turned into grasshopper energy?
Ready for the answer? It's just 10%. That's right, a surprisingly low 10%. Every single time energy moves one step up the chain, only a tiny fraction of it is successfully transferred and actually stored inside the next organism's body.
So where does the rest of it go? Well, as you can see, only a tiny 10% is passed on, while a massive 90% is lost as heat at every single level. Why? Well, because living things have to actually, live. They move, breathe, grow, and hunt. A grasshopper burns 90% of the grass's energy just hopping around and digesting its food. It's essentially acting like a tiny jumping space heater, burning through fuel constantly, which leaves only 10% of that original solar energy available for the frog. When you really think about it, biologically speaking, life is incredibly expensive. It takes a monumental amount of raw solar power at the bottom just to keep the whole machine running.
And this brings us to a really critical question. One you're almost certainly going to see on your homework, by the way. Using the math we just mapped out, ask yourself, why are top predators less common in an ecosystem? Like, why do we see thousands of mice scurrying around in a field, but only 1 or 2 hawks in the sky? Try to connect the dots here.
Here's the aha moment. Extreme energy loss means less energy is available the further up you go. Because 90% of the energy is lost as heat at every single step, by the time you reach the top of a 5-step food chain, there is barely any of that original solar energy left. An ecosystem simply does not have enough fuel to support a large number of top predators. It literally takes a massive base of producers to support just a few hawks at the very top. It's a pyramid, and it's built entirely on pure energy efficiency.
All right, section 3. From chains to webs. Because nature is rarely ever just a straight line.
Let's contrast these two ideas for a second.
A food chain is linear, it's simple, and it shows just one isolated path of energy. But a food web? That is an incredibly complex, vibrant, and interconnected system. In real life, organisms eat multiple things to survive. That hawk we talked about earlier, it doesn't just eat snakes, it might also swoop down and grab a mouse. And that mouse might eat seeds, which came from the exact same plant the grasshopper was munching on. If you were to draw lines connecting who eats who in a real forest, it wouldn't look like a single straight string. It would look like a massive tangled net. A food web provides a much more accurate, deeply interconnected, and realistic picture of how a living ecosystem actually functions day to day.
Oh, and we absolutely cannot talk about food webs without mentioning the ultimate recyclers, decomposers. Decomposers are organisms, think fungi and bacteria, that connect to literally every single part of the food chain. When plants, grasshoppers, frogs, or hawks die, decomposers break them down, returning vital nutrients right back into the soil so the producers can use them all over again. That's exactly why, if you look at a biological diagram, the arrows will eventually all point right back to the decomposers. They complete the magnificent circle of life.
Which leads us beautifully into Section 4, God's sacred balance. Here's the catch. With a system this intertwined, removing or harming one part of the chain affects absolutely everything else. This web of life is highly resilient, sure, but it's also incredibly fragile. If a disease wipes out a specific plant, the primary consumers starve, which means the secondary consumers have no food, and so on. Every single step, every single tiny organism deeply and truly matters to the survival of the whole.
When we study this, we aren't just memorizing biology facts. We are observing an intricate dependence on one another. We're seeing this insanely efficient energy transfer. We are looking at a beautiful, balanced design by God. Just as animals depend on one another in this complex web to survive, we are designed to depend on God. The flawless organization of an ecosystem is a direct reflection of a purposeful creator who ensures that absolutely nothing is wasted and everything has a specific role.
And finally, Section 5, Education intertwined with morality. Let's look at the bigger picture here. Here at HeroesMart Academy, our Godly Learner series teaches a core philosophy. Education needs morality. Think about the food web for a second. It works perfectly because it follows the rules it was designed with. But what happens if we step outside our design? Being smart, having all the scientific facts, but making bad, immoral choices, that equals hurt. I mean, what is the point of being highly educated if you continually make destructive choices that damage yourself, the people around you, and your environment? True education requires a moral compass to guide it. Otherwise, you're just a highly capable person doing a whole lot of damage. It's literally like giving someone a massively powerful sports car, but taking away the steering wheel. The power is there for sure, but without direction, a crash is inevitable. Your moral compass is that steering wheel.
Romans 8:6-7 offers this incredible promise. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. To be carnally minded means focusing only on selfish worldly things, operating without that moral compass. It disrupts the balance and leads to spiritual and physical ruin. But to be spiritually minded, that brings life and peace. It's basically the harmony of a perfectly balanced, undisturbed food web existing right there within your own mind and soul.
So, 8th graders, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to really chew on. You are gaining an amazing education right now. You now understand the sacred, delicate balance of energy and life. So, will you use your education to make moral choices that maintain God's sacred balance in this world? Or will you make bad choices that disrupt it? The energy is flowing through you right now. Your spiritual compass will dictate what you do with it. Thank you so much for joining me today. Stay curious, stay spiritual, and I will see you next time.